Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining the session today. It's great to get the opportunity to present and talk with you, even if it is remotely and asynchronously. I thought I was going to be able to do this thing live, but it turns out fieldwork actually was able to happen this year, which I guess is a good thing. But anyway, hence the recorded lecture. I'll put my contact information at the end of this talk, and I'd be more than happy to chat with you and answer any questions you might have. So thank you in advance for any comments or advice, questions, any of that. More than happy to connect further. My project today presents the results and student feedback from a recent virtual reality and 3D modeling project that I ran for my students in my 100-level general education class at the University of Arizona. It was Classics 160B1, Meet the Ancients, which is basically an intro to Greco-Roman history. Let me start by talking a little bit about the setup for that class, because I think the way in which it operated significantly impacted the outcome and efficacy of the project. So the class itself had 300 plus students in it, and 15 of them were in the Honors College and opted to complete the honors contract originally. And that's essentially an extra project they complete to earn honors credit for the course. So the important thing is that there's no extra section for honors students, and so the instruction and meeting times for the project have to be built into the normal meeting time of the course, which met 3 times per week for 50 minutes per session. So in practice, what this meant is that I met with the honors students only on Fridays for maybe 15 to 30 minutes, and that only started about halfway through the course. And these meeting times ended up fluctuating based on what needed to be covered in the base version of the course, which included both honors and non-honors students. So in all, we had about 10 meetings that lasted about 20 minutes each. Anyway, enough about the structure of the course, onto the project. The virtual reality project originated as part of a grant obtained by the U of A's Center for Digital Humanities, which allowed for the purchase of about half a dozen virtual reality headsets for use by faculty interested in using them for teaching. I personally didn't write that grant, but I was selected as one of the faculty members to use VR in the classroom. The headsets that we got were Pico Neo 2s, which are sort of marketed as a high-powered business VR headset, compared to the more commercially oriented and lower-priced Oculus Rift 2. The software we were requested to use by the grant winner and the VR headset distributor is called Engage VR, which is a virtual meeting space that allows people with multiple headsets to gather together, explore a variety of meeting spaces, and talk with and present to each other. These meeting spaces could be anything from the Bodleian Library to the Ancient Theater of Pompeii to an open field or an apartment or even the surface of Mars. In many ways, it's kind of sort of like a virtual Zoom, with the meeting spaces being akin to a background. Now, my main focus for developing this project was to give the students the opportunity not just to meet and talk within the virtual reality setting, but to actively engage with it. The project I developed asked them to produce a 3D virtual landscape of the ancient Greek sanctuary of Delphi, and then to explore that landscape with their classmates, getting a sense for what it might have been like to be a traveler to Delphi in Greek antiquity. The project itself consisted of 5 steps, which students undertook over the duration of the course. So first, students began by reading secondary sources about the history and layout of the site, and each student chose a monument to focus their project on. Second, students read the ancient primary source account of Pausanias' trip to Delphi in the 2nd century CE, constructing a written response based on that text regarding what they thought a visitor might have experienced when visiting the Temple of Apollo and traversing the Sacred Way. Third, the students conducted research on their particular monument and developed a 3D digital model of that monument using SketchUp Free. And SketchUp Free was chosen as the software for 2 reasons. 1, to provide a no-cost way for students to begin modeling, and 2, because it's relatively gentle in its learning curve compared to a more powerful modeling software, something like AutoCAD or something along those lines. Next, the class worked together within the program Engage VR to articulate their monuments according to the archaeological plan of the site, recreating a very rough model of the site within the virtual reality setting. And finally, students were to progress through the site along the Sacred Way, with each student presenting their work as they move collectively through the virtual reality space. So that was the gist of the project. Students research a monument, build a 3D model, reconstruct the site, and move through it using virtual reality. What I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about how that project went, both from my own personal perspective and from the feedback of the students. This project is still undergoing the IRB review process, so rather than generalize from this experience, I'll just be reporting my own and my students' specific experiences, rather than trying to say what this means for future projects or for pedagogy at large. Out of the 15 students who began with honors contracts, a total of 8 students completed the project, and 7 of those 8 provided feedback for this paper. The questionnaire I gave them consisted of open-ended questions, asking basically what worked well, what didn't work so well, what they'd modify, and their overall thoughts. Now, in terms of what did work well, the overall consensus was that it was useful to be doing and creating rather than reading and presenting in a traditional PowerPoint format. So 5 out of the 7 responses highlighted the process of creation as a major component of what worked well. So one student noted, quote, "I felt like I better connected to what the Temple of Apollo was after reading to create the structure. There was more of a benefit from creating the temple since I would rather create the 3D model than straight out read." End quote. Another student noted that the 3D modeling software SketchUp Free was, quote, "pretty easy to use and understand," and that they really liked this project was different from just a presentation or paper, end quote. Now the most robust comment here is worth noting in full. So the student says, quote, "Recreating an ancient Greek monument is simply fun. It is very rare for me to sit down and do an assignment without thinking, let's just get this over with. This, on the other hand, was more of a let's do this kind of feeling, similar to when you had to do something enjoyable. Though I'm not an architect or anything of that sort, it is very appealing to me to have the power to produce something in a 3D environment. Aside from Greek mythology, I think most people would agree that its architecture is some of the most appealing things about ancient Greece. Being able to present my work at the end was also rewarding because unlike a paper, presenting is a little bit more tangible and it's easier to digest and fun to watch. Personally, I'm most intrigued about the process and troubles of other members of the group and that they had on their journey towards making their monument. Though it's not clear, this exchange allows for a connection between one's project and all the others." End quote. Okay, so personally, one of the big questions I had going into this was less about 3D modeling and more about the efficacy of the virtual reality immersive space. Essentially, does the VR aspect add something more than a novelty aspect to the project as a whole? Now, my personal sense is that this wasn't really the case, but some of the students seem to have felt differently, with 3 out of the 7 students noting that the Engage VR space was something that worked well for the course. One student noted, quote, "The VR experience was unique in its own way. I love being able to be in the 3D space with other people. This again promotes interactivity in times of minimal interactivity between students, which is something I miss from regular school." End quote. A different student said, quote, "Every meeting and Engage with good interactions between everyone were some of the best parts of the project. Even though we aren't together, being able to see avatars and knowing that there was a person was a better experience than Zoom 90% of the time." End quote. Moving on to aspects of the project that could have gone better, the most common theme was the frequency and consistency of the meetings. Because the honors students don't have a standalone section of the class, these meetings had to take place during the normally scheduled class times, and as a result they varied based on how much material needed to be covered in the normal part of the course. Thus the meetings were pretty inconsistent and relatively short, usually only about 20 minutes or so, and really only once a week, maybe less. One of the students noted, quote, "As much as I love doing this project, there are things that I felt could have been executed a lot better. First, scarce and brief VR sessions. I know that everyone, including the professor, may be extremely busy, hence why the short periods of time spent in the VR session. However, this should also be the reason why there should be a greater amount of sessions to compensate for this. I felt like my time spent in Engage was so little that I just wanted more to do and discuss inside that world." Another student said, quote, "I think we could have spent more of our time together learning a little bit more about how to create some of the 3D features and how to use the technology better. I feel like VR has a different learning curve than anything the school has taught us, and spending more time on learning could help." And then a third student said, quote, "The initial proposal said we'd meet every Friday, and I know things come up, but it would have been nice to have a more set schedule. Maybe trying to find a time outside of class that'd work for everyone. That way you don't have to cut into lecture for the rest of the students," end quote. I did feel pretty bad that at the end we weren't able to meet longer and more consistently as a group. Other comments noted problems with the organization of the project more generally. For example, one student said, "A considerable amount of time was used trying to pull up individual slides for our presentations, which I know may be perfected with another group of students. To prevent this, I'd say the best idea is to make all students send their presentations to Dr. Stephan a day or two before presenting. That way all of them can be placed in a single document." Another student commented that there were problems with the platform since Engage doesn't work with Mac or Apple computers. Now, one of the biggest letdowns of the course, both for me and for the students, was that the 3D models created in SketchUp free weren't able to actually be imported into Engage VR by the end of the class. So I had allotted about a week and a half for that process, and it ended up taking about a month or so to happen. So for the final part of the project, where students were supposed to articulate their monuments in the VR space and then move through that space and present to each other, that was never able to actually happen. In terms of what they would change, one student suggested, quote, "I think one of the biggest parts of the project that could have been improved was actually getting the monuments into the virtual world. It was a bit of a letdown to not be able to see all of our monuments rendered together." Another student said something similar, saying, quote, "Make sure that the time required for U of A to upload the models into Engage is known well in advance to ensure that we submit our models on time so that we can actually see our work in VR." And a third student said they wanted, quote, "to render the prototype models in the virtual world first to get an idea of what they'd look like." So overall, it kind of felt like a bummer that all of us didn't get to see that work come to fruition. In the end, 4 of the 7 students thought they learned more through the process than if they had completed a traditional research paper, while 3 thought that wasn't the case. Overall thoughts from the students suggested that they liked the concept, but that the execution was a bit lacking. So one student remarked, quote, "The project is creative, insightful, and informative. Simply trying to put a monument together will, in some way or another, bump you into trying to figure out the story behind its construction. I truly believe that future students may be genuinely invested in giving this project a shot due to its appealing nature and promotion of interactivity among these difficult times." And another student said, quote, "I honestly think it was a cool concept. However, I don't think the effort benefits students more than a research paper. If we had time, I do think moving through the actual structures while the builders teach us about them would have been cool. Going forward, I think tasking students with a mini research project along with building the structure will benefit the student with learning the material they should know and also benefit the students in the tour," end quote. And a third student stated almost exactly the same thing, quote, "I like that it was something out of the box which made it more engaging and interesting. I like a schedule and a plan, so not knowing exactly when we were going to meet was a little stressful for me and sometimes made it harder to plan other plans. Overall, I thought it was very creative and I enjoyed it a lot." And another student ended up concluding, quote, "I think the idea of the project was really unique and I genuinely had a lot of fun doing it. Even though we did not achieve our final goal of rendering all our monuments in the virtual world, I still think I learned a lot about my monument through the studying needed to model it." Now these comments align for the most part with my own interpretation of how the project went. I went into it really thinking about how to use the VR space to allow students to engage with the past in a new way, not just to provide a Zoom conferencing alternative, but to give them a new way to experience Greco-Roman antiquity. The software itself is essentially a VR version of Zoom, where the meeting rooms play the role of backgrounds. So it felt necessary to have the students design something of their own. Personally, I thought the design process was the most effective part of the project, since it allowed the students to combine creativity, active learning, and research into the ancient evidence of the Delphic monuments. Even though some of the students found the VR experience to be enjoyable or rewarding, I personally don't think it provided much beyond a novelty experience. It did feel to me at least very much like a virtual reality version of Zoom, where people meet virtually in a common place and can talk with and present to each other. My biggest regret was the timing of the entire project. And if I had had to do this project again, and that's a big if, my number one focus would be to have an explicit meeting schedule with explicit deadlines rather than developing those as things went along. I personally would not run this again as an honors section within a larger class either, although I could see myself doing this in a smaller seminar of maybe 10 or 15 students. And if I did that, I'd likely also change the VR software to allow for something more customizable, where students could design the landscape as well, right? Mount Parnassus and the Sacred Way, in addition to the monuments that line it. As I move forward with this project, I'll likely continue the IRB process so that I can generalize from this individual experience and comment more broadly on what I think it means for pedagogy more generally. For me personally, however, I'm hesitant to employ VR in one of my classes again in the future. I could imagine myself doing it in a smaller seminar, but those are hard to come by at large public universities like Arizona. Most of all, I appreciate the students' willingness to come along for the ride, embrace the uncertainty and the self-driven nature of the learning, and provide valuable feedback that serves as the core of this paper. I'd be more than happy to answer questions via email or Zoom, so certainly feel free to reach out if you're interested in learning more. Thank you again so much for organizing and having this session and for inviting me to be a part of it. I look forward to communicating with you all. Have a wonderful day.